but I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invitation to speak this morning along with Al. And, you know, I think back to my experience with this case, and when John died in 2013, we had been together for almost 21 years. But of those 21 years, we were married for only 3 months. And that was because in the United States, like in most places, there was no ability for us to lawfully get married for the majority of our 21 years together. And John and I talked early on in our relationship, within the first 2 years, that we wanted to get married. We wanted to be able to say, I thee wed, and have it mean something, have it carry legal weight. But we couldn't do that because it just was not possible in the United States, and definitely not in the state of Ohio where we lived. So John and I thought we will never be able to get married and have it be legal. So we agreed that for us, we would not just have a symbolic ceremony. For us, having marriage means something, having the government recognize us as a couple was too important. So we were not willing to have a symbolic ceremony. So we just thought we will never have the opportunity to get married. And we lived our lives as a married couple, but without that title, without the rights that came with marriage. Well, in 2018, John was diagnosed, or I'm sorry, not 2018. In 2012, John was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. And if you know anything about motor neuron disease, it is a death sentence. There's no cure and no effective treatment. And he got worse and worse. His illness progressed very quickly. And within a year of diagnosis, he had lost almost all abilities. And in 2013, he entered hospice care, so end-of-life care, but he was at home, and I was his primary caregiver at that time. And on June 26th, 2013, John called me into his room because the news was coming out from the Supreme Court about a big case, United States versus Windsor. And Edie Windsor and her wife, Thea, had married in Canada. And when Thea died, Edie received a tax bill from the United States government and the state of New York, where they lived, for more than $800,000. Because the state of New York and the United States both said, Edie, your marriage to Thea doesn't exist in the eyes of the law. So you must pay taxes on Thea's estate. And Edie said no. And Edie filed a lawsuit, which went to the United States Supreme Court. So on June 26th, 2013, I was standing next to John, holding his hand. He was in his hospital bed. And the news came out that the Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. Now, the Defense of Marriage Act was a federal law, a nationwide law that said the United States government did not recognize marriages between members of the same sex, and it would ignore those marriages for all purposes, whether that's inheritance, healthcare, hospital rights, medical rights. They said, we will not recognize a same-sex marriage. Well, the Windsor decision struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, which meant the federal government would have to recognize same-sex marriages. I hadn't planned on this, but hearing that news and realizing for the first time in John's and my 2 decades together that we could finally get married and have at least the federal government recognize our marriage, I realized here's our opportunity to do that. So I leaned over, I hugged and kissed John, and I said, let's get married. And luckily, John said yes. Now, as I mentioned, we lived in the state of Ohio, which had its own state-level version of the Defense of Marriage Act. So in Ohio, it was impossible for same-sex couples to get a marriage license. and if same-sex couples who lived in Ohio went to another state where they got married, where they were legally able to marry, as soon as they came back to Ohio, Ohio refused to recognize those marriages. So John was completely bedridden. He had no abilities, and we had to figure out where to go in order to get married. So I started to research our options, and we decided on the state of Maryland. And Maryland did one thing that made it easier on us. And my whole goal in getting married and traveling to another state was to keep John as safe and as comfortable as much as I possibly could. And the state of Maryland did not require both of us to appear in person to apply for a marriage license. So that meant I could go to Maryland on my own to get the marriage license, come back home to Ohio, and then John and I would then travel together to get married. So we decided on Maryland. And the other important thing I did after I proposed to John, I reached out to John's Aunt Paulette. Years previously, Aunt Paulette told John and me that she thought we represented marriage better than any other couple she knew. And her hope was that one day we would be able to get married. And she said, guys, I would really like to be the one who officiates, who marries you if you ever have that opportunity. So Aunt Paulette went to an internet site and clicked a button to be ordained, to be able to marry couples. So after I proposed to John, I called Aunt Paulette and asked her if her offer to officiate our wedding still stood. And she said, of course, you tell me when and you tell me where. So we knew who would officiate. We knew we were going to Maryland, but the other big decision for us was, how do we get there? How do I get John to another state, especially when John has no physical abilities, completely bedridden? I wasn't willing to put him in his wheelchair and take him in our minivan that far of a distance. I wasn't willing to put him in the ambulance for that long of a trip. And I also could not take him to the airport and fly on a commercial airline. So that left really one option for us, a chartered medical jet. So I started getting quotes on what it would cost to charter a medical jet. And it was something we could afford. It was expensive. We could afford it, but I went to Facebook, and this is really the only positive thing I will ever say about Facebook. I went to Facebook and I posted and I told our family and friends that John and I were planning to get married. We were going to go to Maryland. And I hoped one of our family members or a friend might have a connection. Maybe they might know a pilot or someone who worked for a medical jet company, because I thought maybe we will get a discount. Well, our family and friends started commenting on that post, Jim, you and John deserve to get married, and we want to help make it happen. So please accept this gift of money. And our family and friends covered the entire $14,000 cost of that chartered medical jet. So on July 11th, 2013, John and I took an ambulance to a local airport, and we boarded that medical jet along with Aunt Paulette. Now, something else that happened because of that Facebook post, a friend of ours worked for the local newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and she was trying to get the newspaper to come out in support of marriage equality. So when she found out that we were planning to get married, she contacted us and asked us if we would be willing to let her write a newspaper story about us. John and I discussed it and we said, sure. So we boarded that medical jet and we flew to Baltimore, Maryland, where we landed at the airport and we parked on the tarmac. John and I and Aunt Paulette, we never left that airplane. We stayed in that airplane, and a photographer from the Cincinnati Enquirer met us in that airplane so that he could take photos and video of our wedding. John and I got to hold each other's hands and do what we had wanted to do for so long. say I do, and have it actually mean something. We were able to make our promises to love, honor, and protect each other public and legal. And it really was the happiest moment of our lives together. I know a lot of people thought, well, you've been together for so long. You've been together for more than 20 years. Does marriage really change anything? And I have to say, in some ways, no, but in a lot of ways, and I think the important ways, the way we felt about each other, the way we felt about our relationship, it changed everything. And it was just this wonderful ability to say, I choose you. You are the most important person in my life. And I'm making my promises to you under law to say, I will honor, love, and protect you. That was all we wanted to do. We simply wanted to say, I thee wed. And for John and me, we had no other plans. We simply wanted to live out John's remaining days as husband and husband. That was all we had in mind, nothing else. So we spent maybe 45 minutes on the airport tarmac in Baltimore, and then we flew back to Cincinnati. And when we landed, our family and friends had gathered to surprise us, to welcome us home, with signs saying, husband and husband, Mr. and Mr., congratulations. And it was beautiful to see our family and friends be there to celebrate with us. So we got married on a Thursday. On Saturday, that newspaper story about us came out on the internet. It was in the Sunday print edition of the newspaper, but it came out earlier online over the weekend. And I'll let Al tell more of this story, but Al happened to be at a party where he ran into mutual friends. John and I had friends who are attorneys, and they met Al or saw Al at that party and struck up a conversation, and our story came up in that conversation. And our friends told Al about us. Al had not seen our story on the internet yet. Well, hearing about us propelled Al to action. And he went to his office and did some research. And then he reached out to us through those mutual friends to ask us, John and Jim, would you be interested and willing in meeting Al Gerhardstein, a local civil rights attorney? John and I had no idea why he wanted to meet with us. But we said, sure, we don't know what he wants to talk about, but we're willing to talk. So on Tuesday, 5 days after we got married, Al came to our home. And during that conversation, Al pulled out from his briefcase a blank Ohio death certificate. And he said, now guys, I'm sure you haven't thought about John's death certificate because you've just gotten married. Why would you be thinking about his death certificate? But do you understand that when John dies, his last official record as a person will be wrong? Ohio will say that John was unmarried, and Jim, your name will not be there as his surviving spouse. Now, Al was right. John and I hadn't thought about that. We knew Ohio, the state we called home, would ignore our marriage. It would pretend it didn't exist. But for us, that was abstract. When Al pulled out that death certificate and explained that John's last record as a person would forever be wrong, that abstract understanding of Ohio's Defense of Marriage Act became real. It became something we could understand, and it became something harmful and hurtful. And Al asked if we wanted to do something about it. And John and I discussed it, and John was very clear, yes, Jim, I think we should fight this. But he also made sure that I remembered and realized that he could do nothing to help because he was bedridden. This would all be on my shoulders. But he gave me his permission to take time away from him to do this, to go to court, to talk to the media, whatever it took, he was okay with that, knowing that it would take me away from him, because we both felt this was the right thing to do. So 8 days after we got married, we filed suit in federal court in Cincinnati. And because of John's health, the judge who was assigned to the case had to clear his docket, his court docket, and he had to hear our case as soon as possible. So 11 days after we got married, I was in federal district court for the hearing on this case. And all testimony was written. I did not have to take the stand to testify, but I did have the ability to read a statement to the judge, federal Judge Timothy Black. And I got to look at that judge and talk about John, talk about our relationship, talk about what our marriage meant to us, and also talk about what it meant to us that the state of Ohio would ignore us. Now, a couple really important memories, or one very important memory I have from the arguments that day. The state of Ohio, their main argument to say we have the right to ignore your lawful Maryland marriage, their main argument was that that's okay because a majority of Ohioans had voted for the state constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. And I will never forget Al's response to that argument. Al said, the best way to abridge the rights of a minority is to allow the majority to vote on them. And I thought that was such a powerful statement, and it just rang true to me. It was so accurate, so right. Well, later that same day, federal Judge Timothy Black ruled in our favor and said, Ohio, when John dies, you must fill out his death certificate correctly by recognizing their marriage. John died 3 months later to the day, but he died a married man. He died knowing I would be known as his husband. Well, after John died, the state of Ohio then appealed their loss, our win. They appealed to the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that court heard our case along with another case from Ohio, which I'm sure Al will talk about, and cases from the other states of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Michigan. All of those cases were about the right to marry or the right to have your home state recognize your out-of-state lawful marriage. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against us in December of 2014. And I remember thinking at that point, well, clearly that court is wrong, and it hurt to lose. But I also realized this is potentially what we were hoping for. Maybe now the Supreme Court will accept our cases, hear our arguments for the right to marry, and rule on this once and for all. And that's exactly what happened. The United States Supreme Court accepted the case. And in April 2015, I was in the Supreme Court of the United States for arguments in Obergefell v. Hodges. And it was, I have to say, overwhelming to be in the highest court in the United States, fighting for John, fighting for our marriage, fighting for marriages like ours, fighting for couples like us who wanted to get married. And to hear the states of Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Michigan continue to say that we did not have the right to marry, and if we were allowed to marry, that opposite sex couples would suddenly stop getting married and they would stop procreating. Those were really the main arguments used in the Supreme Court against our right to marry. Well, I was back in the Supreme Court on June 26, 2013, when Justice Anthony Kennedy read his summary decision in Obergefell v. Hodges. And when he started reading the decision, I thought, well, we won. But he kept reading, and I'm not an attorney, and legal writing isn't always clear to me. So I found myself wondering, well, did we really win? I'm not sure. But then when I understood that we did win, I burst into tears, and I could hear people around the courtroom crying with joy. And of course, my first thought was, John, I miss you. I wish you were here. I wish you could understand and know that our marriage can never be erased. And then I realized for the first time in my life as an out gay man, I felt like an equal American. And what a wonderful realization that was. And I always come back to this. This wasn't something John and I ever expected to do. It wasn't something we planned to do. I'm still amazed that I went to the Supreme Court. I'm still amazed that there's a landmark civil rights case with my name on it. But I did it, John and I did it for the best reason of all, love. We loved each other, and we wanted our love, our relationship to matter. Thank you.